All right, good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today is Tuesday, October 12th, 2021. Thank you all for joining us. This is a work session of the Falls Church City Council. We're pleased you all are able to join us with us this evening. I know some of us are joining us electronically. I believe, in particular, our first item, the developer will be joining us by electronic means. But before we get to that, let's start with roll call. Our Assistant City Manager, City Messner, thank you for joining us, and could you please read roll?
Yes, Mayor, I'd be glad to. Ms. Connolly?
Here.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes, here.
Ms. Hardy?
Here.
Ms. Sean Siscott?
Here.
Mr. Lickenhouse is absent. Mr. Snyder?
Here.
Mr. Tarter?
Here?
Thank you, Mayor.
All right, thank you. So let's go ahead and move on, if we can, to our first item on the agenda, which is One City Center, a special exception application, which we had attempted to do, I guess it was last week, if recollection serves correctly. We had some technical difficulties. Our apologies to those watching, and in particular to the applicant. We hope those have been resolved, and we can get on with hearing all about this case. So, Mr. Shields, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you for an introduction.
Thank you, Mayor. And yes, we do believe we've addressed the audio issues that we experienced last time, and we do regret that very much. For tonight, we'd like to jump in right where we left off at the last meeting rather than kind of start from the beginning. But we do need just a quick introduction for those who might be just tuning into this meeting to understand what the item is. So Akita Ruzi, our chief planner on this case, will provide just a quick introduction, and then we'll turn it back over to the development team, Atlantic Realty Companies, and they will pick up where we left off at the end of last week. Ms. Ruzi.
Good evening. It's Akita Ruzi with Planning, and I'll be really quick since I kind of went over some of this last week. So the application before you is for a new mixed-use development proposal. In terms of application status on line 15 of the report, the City Council reviewed the first submission of the application on April 5th. A second submission of the application was received on June 24th. Staff reviewed the new submission and issued comments to the applicant on July 29th. I would like to note that the staff report before you this evening is written based on the second submission materials, but the applicant has made some changes since the second submission that they will share with Council tonight. For project summary, starting on line 40, the proposed project includes a new mixed-use building as well as improvements to existing buildings at George Mason Square. As proposed, the new mixed-use building includes ground floor retail, planned grocery use on ground floor at the corner of Maple and Broad, approximately 26,000 square feet, mezzanine level commercial space of about 13,000 square feet, upper level office use of approximately 33,000 square feet, 6 levels of residential use with 146 units, above ground floor retail and upper story office, and a structured parking garage to serve those uses. Proposed upgrades to existing buildings as part of the project include ground level facade improvements to George Mason Square buildings and upgrades to courtyard and plazas around these buildings. Applications, and that starts on line 78 of the report. The development applications include special exceptions to allow residential use within the mixed-use development and to increase in building height from a maximum of 75 feet in the existing B2 zoning to a maximum of 115 feet. Additionally, the applicant will be requesting an amendment to the property deed covenants to allow residential use on the property, which is also subject to approval by City Council. In terms of previous council feedback, that starts on line 160. At the April 5th work session, council provided guidance related to traffic impact around the site, opportunities for public parking, bicycle and pedestrian connections through and around the site, opportunities to activate the open space, including the proposed WUNRF, affordable housing, and questions and comments relating to general architecture, materials, and building scale. The applicant's response to these comments were provided in the attachments and summarized in the staff report. In terms of changes between, I'm sorry to jump around on the report, but going back to line 126, changes between the two submissions. In the second submission staff reviewed, there are no substantive changes in the project in terms of building footprint, uses, building height, and residential unit numbers. The commercial and residential uses and square footages are generally the same. The first submission was incomplete and missing documents, including the VC's stormwater management, parking and design details, as well as building materials. These documents are now provided in the second submission and included in the report attachments. In terms of staff review, starting on line 280, based on the staff comments letter and the council's previous feedback, staff identified several areas for council's further guidance. Those are listed on page 9 and 10 of the report. Topics include ground floor uses and related commitments in the VCs, which has several items under that header, and then affordable housing, bike share location and operating cost commitment, which I believe the applicant will share updates today. Maple and Annandale roundabout, continued refinement to general architecture and materials, continued refinement to project height and scale, and finally public parking. Just to note, this wasn't discussed as part of the first submission. In the current submission, 30 public parking spaces are included in the project in accordance with the existing parking agreement that dates back to 2013 between the city and the developer. Pursuant to the terms of that agreement, the city would have to pay the developer $300,000 for the cost of those spaces in the new development. That is part of the application that's before the council, and I'll defer to the applicant on that discussion and details of what the proposal includes. A preliminary staff analysis of the project based on the comp plan, small area plan, and the special exception review criteria is provided in the report starting on page 10 and line 357. So I won't dive too much into that. I did cover that at the last meeting, but I'm happy to answer questions later. So I'll wrap up with schedule. A tentative project schedule is provided at the end of the report at line 762. Staff is recommending a public hearing for referral to boards and commissions on October 25th with final consideration and public hearing in March. And that's all I have from staff briefing. I'll defer to the applicant's presentation. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Let's hear from the applicant. Hopefully, we're all able to hear each other this time. Mr. Painter?
Thank you very much. Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Mayor Tarter and members of the council. My name is Andrew Painter with Walsh Colucci, speaking tonight on behalf of Atlantic Realty. Ms. Messer, if we could go to, I believe, slide 25. And while she's pulling that up, I would just like to express my appreciation to council for having us back again, even though it was due to some technical difficulties last time, and also would like to express my appreciation to Ms. Ruzzi for her help on this as well. Just to also note, on the 28th, we had a meeting with the staff liaisons to the boards and commissions to provide an overview of the project, receive initial feedback and comments. We also had a walkthrough of the site. 3 members of council were able to attend, and I appreciate their attendance. And then, and that was on the 29th. And then on the 30th, we had a virtual town hall meeting for those that were not able to attend the in-person walkthrough. So we've had those meetings since our appearance on the 27th. Ms. Ruzzi provided an update of the application and the specific requests. What I'd like to do now is kind of, if with your indulgence, Mayor Tarter, is pick up kind of where we left off and finish out the architecture. And then I will go through, as Ms. Ruzzi said, and just talk about the changes that have occurred since you last saw this in April from an application processing standpoint.
Great, thank you.
Okay, and I know your agenda is long. Thomas Danini, architect with DCS Design. Are you available by any chance?
I sure am. Can you hear me?
So we'll start with you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Good evening. Back on slide 25 where we left the last time, I want to talk about some of the general architectural refinements that we have done since the slides or the images that were shown on April of 2021 and how it's been changed now through September of 21. On the first slide of slide 25, you can see West Broad Street. Above, you see the new elevations of the north elevations, and then on the bottom, you can see the original that were on April 21st. If you can see, one of the things that we did, there was a lot of comments about the building needed a base, a body, and a top. So what we've done, if we clearly identified a true base body and on top of the building. We also done some reduced visual variations along north and west facades to favor more unitized architectural language. There was a comment about that. So if you notice, you can see how we've changed the colors and materials, and now it's more unitized in terms of the facades of the building. If we go to slide 26, the next slide, you can then start going to see the South Maple Avenue. And again, you can see the changes that we've made since April. Again, some of the changes, the variation on the cornice height. We made commitments to ground floor elevations with arch windows to be updated to architectural precast, masonry to be consistent with the architectural language. So we've made a lot of commitments. We've added numerous numbers of balconies throughout the project, and balconies at different sizes. Some of them are fairly large, some of them are mid-size. We've added landscaping, worked with the massing, as I said, the cornice, the finishes. So you can see the changes that we have done since April. If you go to the next slide, you can see the internal court, or I would say that's the facade that is towards West Annandale Road. You can see the loading dock has been screened. You won't see any of that. We've talked about reduced the number of metal mesh and added more of its screens throughout. We actually lowered the garage level to the facade of the building. So you can see the massing on this elevation, how you can see on the bottom of April and September. You can see that the garage came down a floor. Again, we played with the materials, the colors, and with following most of all the comments that were given to us. In the next slide, you can see the South Washington Street. And again, you can see how we reduced the metal mesh. There was something that it was a big comment. And we've added some other screens in terms of art, introduced signage, artwork, and throughout the garage to give it some architecture, some treatment. And you can see how the retail, again, it's on the base of the building. You can see now the existing buildings, how they're getting the retail on the first and second floor. The facade, it's totally changed than what it is today. If you go to the next slide, you can see some of the 3D images that we have provided, again, from April to 21. On the top one, you can see, again, how the materials are more, more unified throughout. The glass is a little bit, it's got a lot more detail to it, especially in the corner. The cornice has changed. And then you can see on the bottom, you can see the garage has come down. We treated the facades a little differently. Again, appreciate all the comments, and that we can incorporate it into the architecture of the building. Andrew, those are my.
Okay, thank you very much, Thomas. Ms. Mester, if we can go to the next slide. So just to highlight some of the changes since our appearance in April, as Ms. Rizzi had said, we've submitted draft voluntary concessions, which I'll go through in just a few seconds. We updated our environmental sustainability commitments, and in summary, they are LEED Gold with a minimum 20% improvement in energy efficiency performance, I guess, as well as a number of additional green measures that we've committed to in the appendix to the VCs, which I'll highlight separately. We've also submitted an economic analysis, which intended to supplement the city's fiscal impact analysis that shows that the development, what the value to the city would be. We submitted a draft amendment to the special warranty deed covenant to remove the residential restriction. We submitted that in Microsoft Word so that City Attorney McCroskey can take a look at that, edit it, that sort of thing. But essentially, if the project is approved, this would, we anticipate would be executed following action on the special exception request. We've upgraded our transportation commitments, agreed to reconstruct the crosswalks at Broad and Washington and at Maple and West Broad, and install a new traffic signal along South Washington Street, along with pedestrian actuated signals. We've committed to a transportation demand management plan, as well as a parking management plan. We have provided a draft interim and parking plan so that it sort of highlights, the construction phasing and how parking would be provided for both construction workers and existing tenants. We provided a shared parking analysis to balance parking demand and market expectations. We updated our traffic impact analysis as well. I guess we can go to the next slide, please. On our CDP, we provided more detail of the city center park design and layout and those details. We updated our CDP to provide more detail of the streetscape and the landscaping areas, updated the graphics to represent current design layouts. We added bicycle racks, bike share stations, and wayfinding sign locations as well. We also provided a covered bus shelter along West Broad Street. We refined the design of the drive aisle that we've referred to as the VUNERF, specifically between existing buildings and the VUNERF. We provided decorative string lights and public art, movable bollards, high-quality pavers, and planters. We also, at staff and city council's request, eliminated the left turn into the VUNERF and revised that design to be accessible only in a right-in, right-out configuration. So you'd have sort of a raised pork chop, if you would, to prevent left turns in and out. We elevated or evolved the interior courtyard spaces as well as our rooftop courtyard spaces. As Thomas had mentioned, we have reduced the parking garage levels from 9 to 8. We also reduced the amount of parking on the site from 973 spaces to 875 spaces. And that proposed parking rate is comparable to nearby multifamily projects, including 301 West Broad, which maintains 1.3 spaces per unit, Founders Row, which maintains 1.31 spaces per unit. The parking garage itself, by eliminating that floor of parking, increases our parking reduction requests. We were previously at 11.3%. We are now at requesting a reduction of 20.4%, which we think is justifiable. In terms of stormwater, we have agreed to a 20% reduction to the 10-year, 24-hour peak rate of runoff for the area of the property that will be redeveloped. The remaining portion of the property will be reduced to what's known as a forested condition. We also agreed to an additional 20% reduction. The next one down, we have provided a pedestrian path between Maple Avenue and the VUNERF, if you will. This was a request from staff or from council to sort of find a way to provide a dignified, gracious way to get pedestrians from, again, Maple Avenue to the interior part where the LED screen would be at the end of the VUNERF. We can't break the building up due to elevation changes, but we'll have a well-designed, well-lit, fully ADA accessible way for people to get through that will be open 24/7. We have also provided, again, on South Washington Street, opposite Independence Square, a full traffic signal as well. So there should be full pedestrian connectivity to break up these blocks. We upgraded our view book, revised our view book to provide a refinement of elevations, which you just saw, landscape design and site furniture. The architecture, as Thomas had mentioned, was updated in terms of color schemes, simplification in facades, which was an issue that was identified by council, variations in the planes and cornices, incorporation of balconies, and again, to give a sense of a series of buildings that are designed and architecturally speak to each other, but are designed to look as though they've been added over time rather than having it sort of be a super block single building. Councilman Snyder had asked about rental units versus condominiums. These are, again, planned to be rental units, at least of right now, but we did add into our draft voluntary concessions to allow permit the conversion of all or a portion of the rental units to condominiums if conditions warrant in the future. If we can go to the next slide. In terms of voluntary concessions, just sort of walk through them. We have, committed to about 1,400 linear square feet of new streetscape upgrades, the benches, the pavers, the bike racks, and we've committed to maintain them for the life of the project. That includes all site frontages along along our property, on all four frontages, as well as 384 linear feet of existing streetscape materials that we are, that we're committing to maintain. We have also committed to further setbacks than what the zoning ordinance requires, in line with the streetscape master plan that was adopted in 2017. That results in about a little over 2,000 additional square feet of enhanced streetscape dimensions on South Maple and West Annandale Road, where we're basically taking the 5-foot sidewalk and increasing those dimensions to 16 and 18 feet. In some cases, they'll be even wider than that, because the specific building sort of jogs and even further back than those setbacks. As I mentioned, we committed to a bus shelter along West Broad, the 4 crosswalk upgrades at the 2 intersections at Broad and Maple and Broad and Washington. We've committed to a mid-block crossing opposite the end of the Vunerf, near where the Hunan West Broad restaurant is, near Mr. Brown's Park, to provide further connectivity in the downtown area. We committed to the traffic signal and pedestrian signal along South Washington Street. We committed to a bike share station, and have committed to the annual operating, or provide annual operating costs for 30 years. This is something that staff has not yet seen, but this is an additional commitment that we're making at staff's request. The location that bike share used to be in the Vunerf, and at staff's request, we have relocated it to the proposed city center park at the intersection of West Maple and Annandale, just to provide better accessibility. If we can go to the next slide. We are dedicating the land for the traffic circle on our site. We have agreed to program in the 30 public parking spaces. As Ms. Ruzzi mentioned, there is an old parking agreement that was hammered out between the city and Atlantic Realty that post-redevelopment of this property, the city would pay $10,000 a space for 30 parking spaces. This is an item that we need to talk about, basically about how we're going to handle it, both from an Atlantic side and from the city side. But that is subject to an existing agreement that is in place, binding on both parties right now. And I would put an asterisk by this, that we just need to have a conversation about it. We've committed to providing an emergency vehicle parking space in the parking garage for EMT and police. We have a and it should be $1.73 million schools contribution, $125,000 library and parks contribution. And the reason those numbers are off is because they were calculated on the total amount, when in fact they should be calculated on the non-affordable units, which is 231 units. We've committed to public art across the site with a minimum investment of $25,000. As we mentioned last time, there is about a 10,000 square foot parking lot at the intersection of Maple and Annandale that we are proposing to redesign and redevelop with a public park. And so we have the dedication of that land to the city, plus the improvements, the plantings, and all the work that goes into it that we're committing to. Another issue that we needed to discuss is the affordable dwelling units. We have purposely kept this at the 6% baseline, which is what the other, what other projects have up until recently have committed to. That results in about 15 units, and we acknowledge that there is no greater issue, or not no greater issue, but this is one of the top issues, is housing affordability in the city. And so how we deal with increasing that percentage, how the units are paid for, the size of the units, the AMI tiers. This is a sort of a second big ticket item that I think we'd appreciate some clarification on and some direction on, because it all comes out of sort of the same funds and everything like that from this project. We have a $20,000 stormwater fund contribution that we're making as well. If we can go to the next slide. In terms of environmental, as I mentioned, we've committed to an additional 20% stormwater volume reduction beyond what the city code requires. We have agreed to LEED Gold, plus an additional 20% reduction in energy, or improvement in energy efficiency. We have electric vehicle charging stations for 27 spaces, plus we've agreed to run conduit for an additional 18 spaces, so that additional EV chargers can be installed when if conditions warrant. We have about 13,000 square feet of vegetated roof, and then we've committed to an additional list of sustainability measures as an appendix to our voluntary concessions. Those line items are listed here. If we can go to the next slide. And then sort of to conclude the voluntary concessions, we have committed to construct a minimum 3,000 square foot conference facility and have that facility be used at no charge by city organizations and nonprofits, and on a first come first served basis. That conference facility will also be open not only to the tenants of this building but also for George Mason Square. And then we have had discussions with the Chamber of Commerce for a permanent home on the second floor of the building with office space, with their ability to use the conference facility as well. Obviously, they would be given priority as well as the tenants before any city boards or commissions or organizations or other nonprofits would be used. But we've also committed to fitting out that space for the Chamber of Commerce as well. Those discussions are ongoing, and I understand that Founders Row has also expressed interest in having the Chamber of Commerce at their site as well. So that'll be up to the Chamber and the deal that they're able to strike with both of the applicants, I guess. And then, of course, as we talked about George Mason Square, the facade and plaza upgrades, and then the new drive aisle for the VUNERF, we have programmed that to be closed off for private pedestrian events as well. Keep in mind there are 3 entrances to the proposed garage, the VUNERF being one of them, so that it can increase the ability for us to close that space off for pedestrian events. So with that, I believe, Mayor Tarter, that summarizes the changes since April, architecturally, procedurally, and in terms of the voluntary concessions.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I'm glad this went off without a technical hitch.
And comments from council. So does anyone want to start? Ms. Hardy?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Painter and the rest of the team for coming back. I'm actually going to start with questions and then comments. I think last time we talked about kind of your plan for existing businesses or how you all had a plan. Could you share any more details on how you're going to take care of them through the transition if this project is approved?
Yeah. Councilwoman Hardy, we have reached out, or Atlantic Realty has taken the lead on reaching out to existing businesses, and we have provided sort of a construction parking project or construction parking summary with our application submission that shows how the parking would be staged, where construction worker parking would occur, and where existing tenants would be able to park, honoring existing leases, and in some cases actually improving them because the temporary parking lot would be located along West Broad Street. Adam Schulman from Atlantic Realty is here as well. He has been in contact with our tenants. But Adam, do you want to address your outreach to existing tenants?
I don't know how much more there is to add other than what Andrew just said. I have reached out to certainly not to all tenants, but there have been some tenants that have wanted to discuss this in greater detail, and I have met with them, some on more than 1 or 2 occasions, and tried to get to the point of finding out what their concerns were and how we could possibly alleviate them. I will say that there, not every issue has been resolved yet, but that is something that I'm comfortable that we're going to get to that point as we try to satisfy everybody's needs. We've done a number of projects like this over the years, and it's always in our best interest to keep our tenants happy, and that's absolutely what our goal is. And we'll continue to work with them in every way that we can to make sure that they're looked out for, and so that their business can continue to thrive.
And I would just elaborate as well. Our voluntary concessions require us to submit a demolition and staging plan and to obtain the city manager's approval of that plan, as well as a construction, traffic, and parking plan, which shows how there can be sufficient parking for tenants and for construction workers. And then we've also committed to establishing a community liaison during construction as well, for this, not only for the tenants of this building, but also, others that are proximate to this location, whether it's across West Broad Street, Annandale, or Maple.
Crossing on West Broad, does that intersect with the pork chop and the hawk signal that's also planned? Is that the same thing?
Yes, that's exactly right. So it would run just north of that, directly across the street, kind of midway between the CVS and Brown's Hardware, right in the middle of the block.
Good, but that's really needed because I think it's informally used as one already, so I think it would be terrific to see that improvement. So as for my comments, let me start with the one that I actually rarely talk about, which is architecture. I think if you know my comments on council, I rarely talk about it, but I think there's still some improvement. I've seen the improvements from April to September and appreciate the work that's been done, but I still feel like the existing buildings could be more harmonious with the other work that's done. So I think right now you're proposing that the first and second floor are reskinned. I'd love to see the entire building done if possible, because especially having joined you all on the walking tour, seeing the existing office buildings and then kind of what's planned, it's pretty jarring, the differences. So I think it's a great opportunity to kind of bring it together and make sure that the two are compatible. My second question is around affordable housing. I know right now you're at that 6%, as Andrew stated, as our current policy. Clearly, we've been raising the bar in Falls Church, so I would love to see that number go higher. Third is a request I have for staff. As I commented with Founders Road 2, I would love to see green space, open space, and tree canopy comparisons for each of our projects. Again, I think we like to think that we continue to raise the bar on each of these, and so I'd like to see the comparisons for recent projects, say the last 5 years or so, and what this project is proposing. Fourth comment is around public art. So I think the VC stated that there's a $25,000 commitment, so that's good. I think there's an opportunity to think about kind of that Broad and Washington intersection. So I think in the past, Jim Snyder, kind of the community planning director, has talked about how that really can be a premier corner for the city. And I think you guys were proposing to finish up that intersection. I think I've seen some really creative ideas where people do some sort of like ground mural on the floor as kind of the center point for the city. So whether the art is done there or elsewhere, I would love to see more of a commitment, especially since we've done, we're going to do the Insight project Cross Street. I think this is another really good opportunity, something that's really spectacular at the corner. And then my last comment's really around the public parking. If I've understood correctly, what you're proposing right now, which is I think the first time I've seen anything like this, is that the city pay you $300,000 for the 30 public parking spaces per an old, I think, deed that was there or some sort of agreement that we had. Is that correct? This is a question for maybe Ms. Bruzzi.
That is correct.
And it was just a carryover from kind of an old agreement we had?
That is correct. Yeah, there is a 2013 agreement that was then renewed in 2018, which essentially just renews the terms of the 2013 agreement. And that agreement then talks about the $300,000 payment towards the parking.
And the height and the density and the special exception that's requested, I would love for that to be up for discussion. So that's it for my comments for now. Thank you.
All right, other comments or questions? Mr. Snyder?
Thank you very much. I certainly overlap many of the questions that Councilmember Hardy just raised, but let me be a bit more clear about some of them. Our new standard is at least 10% affordable dwelling units, and this project needs to provide for that, and not taken out of the other VCs, especially the VCs for the school and library. So for me, that's a fundamental change that needs to be made. The second issue is the city paying for parking spaces after we're permitting a development that will net millions of dollars of profit to the developer. So I guess my question is kind of, who are you kidding? And more importantly, the fact that it was in a prior agreement. I note that you're asking for the deed to be changed that limited development to commercial. So there are all kinds of documents that are going to be changed in the process of this, and the city paying for parking spaces is just something that I find unacceptable. The schedule with regard to outreach to the existing businesses in the neighborhood, I've been contacted by key players in both who were not knowledgeable about the town hall. So something happened with regard to the notice there that it didn't get out to fundamental voices that need to be involved in that. So I'm not entirely sure that we've done what we need to do in advance of forwarding this in terms of appropriately noticed town hall meetings to the existing businesses and to the neighborhood. The next question is the reduction in parking, the 8 stories of parking garage, the large numbers of vehicles, in an intersection now that's already gridlocked many times a day, I need to be convinced that we're measuring not just any added vehicles, but whether that intersection and the surrounding major roads are capable of sustaining the proposed increase, considering current conditions, and the danger of spillover traffic into already problematic neighborhood streets where we're already getting a lot of concerns about safety and cut-through traffic. So I'm going to need to see a lot more about how we're going to handle effectively the additional transportation. Here's a question. How much of the commercial space is new? That is, you're preserving the existing commercial occupancies in space. So how much are you adding to the commercial space for the city, and what are the occupancies that you have legally sealed at this point? That's a question.
So, Councilman Snyder, and I have to defer to Atlantic, but I don't believe that we've sealed any retail spaces at this point in time. The amount of new commercial uses on the site is 109,912 square feet. The existing
Square, is that right?
that's right, which is about 90,000 square feet.
A better addition than we've seen with some other projects lately. And the issue of massing, particularly a large and 8-story parking garage fairly close to a neighborhood, I think will clearly raise some concerns with them. But in other ways, this project is better than some that we've seen recently, one that was 95% residential. So clearly, I think you've tried to preserve the existing commercial and add to it. So these are just some of the concerns that I have. I wanted to be honest with you what my concerns are right up front at this point. And hopefully we can resolve them. So thank you very much.
Ms. Hiscott?
Thank you. And just to echo my colleagues' comments on ADUs, the expectation and hope for 10%, again, with a $300,000 charge for parking when you're seeking an increase in height and density. I also agreed that it would be great to have another walkthrough. Having spoken with a couple of the business owners over the past weekend, they'd like an opportunity to just continue to talk about how they're going to keep in business. It's obviously very important for us to keep those businesses have been here a long time and successful and really part of the community, able to stay open throughout the process that's going to be happening diagonally across the way, as well as this project when and if it moves forward. The other thing, you've done some great work and changes on the environmental aspects. Thank you so much. I also, in terms of moving targets, the 5% electric vehicles, I see you get there through conduit and parking spaces, but I'd really like to see that 5% be EVs from the get-go instead of the 27 spaces plus conduit, but actually having those. As we can see from a state level, we're going to be increasing production of electric vehicles, and the hope from an environmental perspective is certainly that our electric vehicle use is going to increase very quickly, as we'll learn and talk about more on our meeting later tonight. So I'd really like to see that increase. And then I was wondering if you have one of the diagrams show the walk through the pedestrian ADA, how you can get from one end to the building to the other. You mentioned that, but I'm not sure if I've tracked the visual, the drawing that goes along with that to get a better sense of how you get from one end to the other.
Yeah, and I don't know, Councilwoman Hiscott, I don't know which one is the best one to look at. It may be, Ms. Nestor, if we could go to slide 15, maybe this is the one. And Thomas, our architect, I don't know if you want to describe it, but I don't know, Ms. Nestor, if we can bring up that slide 15. If not, Mrs. Sir.
It so that I can explain it to somebody else who asks me how.
Sure.
Thank you.
So Okay, so here it is up on the screen. And Thomas, feel free to elaborate, but there'd be a pedestrian entrance that would be located right where the little triangle is on South Maple Avenue. And then there's a walkway. And keep in mind, the Maple Avenue frontage at that location is a full floor below where the VUNERF is, just due to the topography. So we have to get people up, and so there will be a staircase, and then there will be elevator access as well to get people between those 2 points. That will be open 24/7.
So if you're coming into the Werner, if you're walking into the Werner, if you get into the elevator, you can go down one level to what is shown here, and then you to continue the path, and then you can come out on South Maple Avenue. There is a, because of the loading docks and everything in the buildings, it's impossible for us to create a clear, stairs and from one floor to the other. So this is the best way that we can connect from one level to the other and connect both through the site.
Questions and comments for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions and comments? Mr. Duncan?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Painter. Just a few bullet points here I wanted to run through quickly. I appreciate your flexibility on the 300,000 for 30 parking spaces. When lawyers say we need to talk, I interpret that as a feature that might be able to be dropped in the final agreement. Call you and raise you on affordable housing. I mean, to me, our new standard is 12% at 60 AMI. So that's what I would love to see us do at this location. I mean, in a real sense, this building is, the hopes and the aspirations of Falls Church. It's different from the West Falls project, which is, a new part of the city and so forth. This is the core of our downtown, and in every respect, I think it ought to exemplify our goals and hopes for the future, and affordable housing 12% at 60% AMI would be what I would hope to see there. Be interested to know what your thinking is on the stick for guaranteeing commercial occupancy of the space. Every time previously we've had a major anchor tenant promised to us, we've tried to come up with some way to peg the opening of that to be named later anchor tenant to commercial occupancy permits, or occupancy permits for the residential, or some other stick that enables us to be sure that what we are talking about this winter, which would be underway in terms of construction next winter, which would open, 3 winters from now. It's hard to predict the future, but we would like strong assurances that the commercial that's promised will be delivered. It's just an opportunity to educate us once again on the virtue of grocery stores. I guarantee that if we put this out to boards and commissions, the talk of the town that the holiday season is going to be another grocery store. And I'm an evangelist of that belief system that groceries are big traffic drivers. We bring in people who do not live in the city to do business at our groceries, and that's great because they patronize other businesses while they're here. But I would like for you all to, make the case that a grocery tenant of the sort that you hope to attract is going to be complementary to the existing groceries that we have, and a catalyst for business for other lines of economic endeavor in the city too. The traffic impact analysis, that's the second thing that people will be talking about over the holidays. Traffic studies are hard to believe. Almost invariably they present information which tells us that the current level of service will be at least preserved and perhaps even improved. And that's just something that's very difficult for people to take on board, absorb, believe. I think it is possible. Anyway, I would like to see us emphasize, as Mr. Snyder says, the traffic impact and the level of service at this intersection so that folks can have some better understanding of why we think that the levels of service can be retained, if not improved. The financial impact, if you all, I think somewhere in the materials, you've plugged this project into our relatively new per acre or per unit measurement of financial impact. I would like to see this project put on that grid that we discussed when we were talking about Founders Road 2 and see where it stacks up. One quick question, the existing mature trees that are in the streetscape along Broad and Washington now, would those be taken out as has been the custom when we do big new developments like this, or would those possibly be preserved?
Councilman Duncan, it's my understanding, and Kevin Tankersley is our landscape designer here, but it's my understanding that those would be preserved.
Would be good, I think, if possible, since we do have substantial streetscape space there now. If those trees could be preserved, that would be visually pleasing, I think, and environmentally positive, of course. Finally, the other topic that came up in connection with one of the other buildings, I forget which, was the prevalence now of Uber Eats, DoorDash, you know, the pickup and delivery food services, and the transportation plan for the building, you know, which used to be focused on deliveries, now needs to make accommodations for that new source of traffic movement. So I would like to see a little bit more about what you think can be accomplished to get that amenity, you know, as a feature of this building while still enabling traffic to move at a steady pace around it. I think that's all. Thanks.
All right.
Thank you.
Any other comments, Vice Mayor Connolly?
Thanks, Mayor Charter. And thank you, Mr. Painter and Mr. Schulman. A couple questions about height. So as I'm looking at some of these pictures, and I think page 9 is a good one to look at, you're asking for a height bonus to 115 feet, right?
That's correct.
Is that measured from Washington Street, Broad Street, or Maple Avenue, or Annandale? What's the?
I believe that is average site elevation. Thomas, can you confirm that?
That is correct, yes. The average grade elevation is actually 320.39.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Sorry, the measurement's taken from an average grade. So what we do is we take measurements throughout the site and come up with an average, and the average is actually 320.39.
Okay. And Ms. Ruiz, that's how we normally do this?
Yes, I believe that's the code requirement that we measure from average grade.
Okay, very good, thank you. It's just, when we've talked about this before, you've talked about it having 4 front entrances essentially because there are 4 streets fronting it. And it seems like it's really high on Annandale, but if it's average, that makes sense. I also thought it was interesting that you are requesting a 20% parking reduction and a 20% stormwater reduction. The 20% stormwater reduction means you're going to take away more stormwater. Parking means you want less parking places, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And then can you talk a little bit about the green space? And page 14 is what I was looking at.
Sure, and I don't know if Kevin, I don't know who the appropriate subject matter expert can be to talk about that. Kevin, are you available by any chance to sort of talk through some of the green space designs on the site?
I see it there.
Yes, Andrew, this is Kevin Tankersley.
Okay. So what's the percentage of green space in this project?
I believe
the percentage
it's 30-ish%. Is that right, Kevin? I think that number sticks in my head.
Seems high.
Yes.
Right, and then the amount that's at the ground floor that's actual usable space was somewhere hovering around 16%. And I believe the zoning ordinance requirement was 15%. if memory serves.
Yes, that 15% is the requirement, and the ground floor space is 16%.
Okay,
So it
and that
exceeds-
includes the little park on the other side of Annandale Road.
That's correct.
Right,
That's
okay.
correct.
And that's one I think that keeps getting lost as we look at this, that little triangle is part of this project. And then you have a green roof?
That's correct, and it's about a little over 13,000 square feet of green roof.
And as I'm looking at slide 14 on mine, which is different than 14 here, but it looks like the green roof is the area at the corner of Broad and Maple. Yes, that's the one. Is that where the green roof is?
No, so
No.
that I believe, and I believe that is just to denote the large 26,000 square foot grocer as a
Okay,
single
okay.
space. I believe
That is correct, yes, that is correct.
and Vice Mayor Connolly, I believe that the green roof is actually sprinkled throughout the roof. So it's a bit here, it's a section here, it's a section here. It'll be incorporated with the overall amenity deck, which is on the roof of the building.
Okay,
So it's,
so there will be other things on the building, it won't be all green roof.
that's right, that's right.
That is correct, and also what we've done on top of the garage, we've actually put amenities on top of the garage, and we've also added green roofs on the garage itself.
Okay. And will the garage be taller than other parts of the building, or will it be completely surrounded by other building? The retail,
The garage has now, it's a floor lower, so it is, the new buildings will be surrounding it, if that's clear. So the buildings will be taller than the garage, the new buildings.
Okay.
The existing buildings will still be lower, but the new ones will be higher, yes.
okay. And then we mentioned the neighbors, outreach to the neighbors and the existing businesses. And I'm just wondering about outreach to residential neighbors. And while there aren't residential neighbors that butt up right against this block, there are residential neighbors that are just over in the townhouses off of Annandale Road in Winter Hill. And I'm wondering if you've done any outreach to those neighbors.
So, Vice Mayor Connolly, we have not to date. Bernadette Baruch had reached out to us and had provided us today, in fact, with the head of the Hill HOA president, contact information.
Okay.
And she's working to get the condominium contact information as well. And we pledged during our virtual town hall to reach out to them.
Okay, very good. So I was going to ask you, please do reach out to them because they do have concerns about traffic and crowding, and
Right.
although they're not right next door, will be affected by this. And then as we were doing the walking tour, which it's always good to do a walking tour and really get a sense of how things are going to fit on the street. One of the questions I'd asked was about the rolling road, which is the historic rolling road that comes in below that triangular park. It's not part of this project, but it is a very historic location. I'm wondering if there's anything you can do in your voluntary concessions to help us with being able to recognize the rolling road as an important historical area.
You know, we are happy to look at that. What's interesting, when we put our heads together the following day, I originally, because I love local history, and I know about the Star Tavern that used to be at the intersection of Broad and Washington. And my initial thought was, well, let's go ahead and get maybe we do a marker there. And there's already a marker for the Star Tavern there. And then I started thinking about the rolling road, and there's a small marker for the rolling road along South Washington Street, south of our, it's on West Annandale Road, near the Dunkin' Donuts. But we're happy to look at that if it's a marker, if it's a talking piece or something like that. But that is something that you brought up, and I just wanted to let you know that we've been looking at it. So.
Be great if it could become an actual park. And those are my questions. Thank you very much.
All right, are there other comments or questions? If not, I have a few. These are kind of a mix of both. Let me start with a question. Could you describe the materials of the building? Maybe your architect, sort of take us around real quick.
Sure. If we start with slide, there you go, 25. So we have a combination of masonry, which is combination of precast and brick, and some probably architectural precast or architectural block in some locations. We're going to have glazing, which of course we have windows, so we're going to have a large number of glazing, or as you can see in the elevations and the imagery, a lot of glass. We're also going to have some type of wall screening system. That will be some type of a metal screen, and some of it will have a translucent system. It would have some television screens as well to show movies and concerts and things like that, like can be shown in the Woonerf. So, and we're also going to have a metal, some type of a metal finish that we're talking about on the top 2 floors of the building. And again, it's architectural precast and masonry and all of those as I mentioned. So I hope that answers the question.
Board or vinyl on this?
No.
Okay,
None of that.
good. Let me ask a few more questions. So the building currently doesn't have and is not intended to provide any below-grade parking, is that right?
There is a level of parking under the building that is essentially dedicated to the tenant on the first floor, on the corner of West Broad Street and South Maple Avenue.
So is that retail
Which we're
parking?
calling the grocer. Yes, which we're calling the grocer, but it will have about 120 parking spaces under the store.
Got it. And will there be an escalator or something taking them up, or is that all elevated?
Yes, we've talked to the tenant, we've looked at plans, and it's a combination of, escalators and elevators, and yes, all of that, so, yes.
Gotcha. And
And it
as
will
far
be
as
well
grocery
lit.
stores go, I'm going to say that I think it is great for the city and has been in these past years. And I think 27,000 or 25,000 will bring a different type of grocery retailer. Maybe it's a Lidl or something like that, or Trader Joe's. I don't know what their square footage is, but it'll be something different than I think we have in the city. That would be my guess. Obviously, you're probably not ready to divulge who you're talking to, but I do think that provides a different market and also provides tons of tax dollars for the city. A few more questions here for you, or concerns. I do think the garage, how many stories is it right now?
I believe is 8.
Above grade, 8?
Yes.
Man, that's a big garage. I got to tell you, I think, people are going to have a heck of a time wanting to wind up 8 levels of garage to load that top level. So I would just encourage you to find some way to drop that height just for functionality. I'm sure you know better than I do, but it just seems like a real tall garage. If you are to do a garage that tall, I really think it's really important to have it fully hidden, not just mostly hidden. And so I guess I would just want to make sure, it sounded like you made the statement earlier that it is completely surrounded by buildings, but I would want to make sure that's the case. I don't think having precast concrete as a prominent feature of a new building is a good look. So I would just suggest if you can find a way to bring that garage down some more, I think it would behoove probably everybody, and to make sure that it is remains hidden. I'd like to ask you about your parking spaces. So the 30 parking spaces, can you tell me how those would function? Those are essentially free parking spaces, or are they paid? What's the intention there?
No, those would be, there would be no gantry or anything like that. They would be free, open to the public 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Got it.
And they would be sort of the first spaces in the garage.
Got it. So, I mean, a couple of thoughts on that. As everyone else has said, the notion of the city paying you $300,000, I think is a real issue, particularly when you think that the property that the city sold the developer many years ago has a restriction that it can only be used for commercial purposes. And so the expansion of commercial to include multifamily residential, my guess is significantly increases the value of that property. And so I would certainly think that's something that's going to meet with continued pushback from the city, this notion of paying the developer anything. I would also in general note that it's great to have 30 free parking spaces. To my mind, even if people had to pay for some parking in this large garage, I think it would behoove our downtown to have access to additional spots, even if they, again, have to be paid for at an hourly rate or some other way. But I would encourage you to find a way to make that garage open, the rest of it or some of it open to the public so that we can alleviate some of the traffic or parking problems we have in the downtown, even if there is a cost associated with it to the consumer. Let's see what else I've got here. I would also echo the concern about having the new office facade continue up farther than just the first level on the existing building. I like the idea of the chamber being in the center of town as opposed to being on the farther reaches. So I think it'd be a great location to have in your building if you could come to terms with them. Bike share, frankly, I think it's better on your Woolnorth than it is down the hill. I think there's more people, and that's where bike share belongs, is where the people are. And so my vote would be to keep it where you had it earlier, or someplace up in the main part of your building. I do think this park presents some challenges. It's surrounded by some pretty busy roads. And so I think we all need to give some more thought to how we can use this effectively so that it would get a lot of public use and not just be something people drive by with some trees in it, but actually find some way to make it meaningful and useful and well utilized. So I think it needs some more thought as well. How about your average unit size or your unit mix? Could you describe that briefly?
Sure, and if I may, before I do that, just to let you know, it was actually staff's recommendation that it be moved to over there. Yeah.
I do, but that's my 2 cents. Is I think it belongs where the people are up the hill, where the density is, and so people have to ride a bike up a hill to get where they want to go.
Yeah, and I also say too, I mean, we've been working with staff on the design of the park too, and right now it's kind of sort of sitting there, it's sort of an island unto itself of green space surrounded by what is essentially other parking, surface parking spaces. I think eventually, though, the concept is the redevelopment of this entire quadrant. Eventually, this will be in the center of everything. So I agree that you need to take a look at the design of it. I just wanted to let you know that we've been working with some staff on that too.
Yeah, listen, I appreciate it. You guys have been very thoughtful. And I'm sure you had a large part in all this, Mr. Painter. But I think in a lot of ways, this project is quite thoughtful and well considered. And, you've taken account to where it is in the city and a lot of questions that have been raised previously you've given consideration to. So I know that park is going to be one of those things that needs further thought. And it may be at some point it just is a park and it's not fully programmed or fully designed, and that comes later. I don't know. But I do think as it stands now, it needs some more work. And I don't know whether that's your work or our work or everybody's work. But anyway, so I appreciate that thought. Unit mix and average unit size.
Sure. Okay. So, 246 units, 70% of them are going to be studios, one bedrooms or one bedrooms with a work area, which, and so as far as the studios go, 10% of them will be studios. The studio size themselves, the average unit size is 654 square feet. 20% will be one bedrooms. And so the one bedrooms are ranging from 697 square feet, or if they have a den/work area, they would be up to 874 square feet. So studios are 654, one bedrooms are 697, one bedrooms with den are 874 square feet. And then the two bedrooms are about 1,200 square feet.
I'll blend out to what's the average unit size in the building? Do you know?
That I have to. Yeah, I'm sorry. I've got it in our fiscal impact.
Worries, but maybe when the day comes, you can let us have some more information on that. I would say also as it relates to your commercial space, having commitments and obligations that relate to that. We're dealing with Founders Row 1 right now, which is entirely empty on its ground floor and sounds like it'll continue to be so for some time. And that doesn't sit well with me. And so I'd want to make sure that we have commitments to ensure that the commercial comes along with the residential. And so I just sort of plant that seed. You are also in an area that has tree lights across the street, and we'd love to make sure that you're able to do that on your side of the street. And so the standard for tree pits may include electrical outlets. If it doesn't, I would just suggest maybe go ahead and do that as well. Also, outdoor seating, creating nooks and crannies for that along the perimeter of your building, I think would be great. The Woonorf maybe provides some of that, but just keep in mind, let's enliven the whole streetscape as we circle around your building. Let's see. I think that's about all I've got right now. Does anyone else have any additional comments or questions?
Mayor Charter,
Yes.
just a note on tree light. Yeah, we have committed to providing the outdoor electric boxes for the tree lights. In terms of outdoor seating, especially along West or South Washington Street, we are proposing as part of our George Mason Square improvements to do similar bump outs or outdoor seating areas, similar to what has been done with Ireland's 4Ps a few years ago with bumping that out and kind of narrowing that sidewalk just a little bit, provide those outdoor seating and activation opportunities. And then I just did a quick back of the envelope math, a blended rate of everything. The average unit size for the entire project comes out to be about 930 square feet.
You mentioned narrowing up the sidewalk. What are you narrowing up to?
So right now, I believe it's well in excess of 20 feet wide. So I don't know if, Thomas, if we know those dimensions or not. I can get those for you at the next meeting.
Well, we do have streetscape, essentially requires a setback, I think, of 20 feet. And so I'd certainly want to maintain that and clear space at 10 feet. So I guess I would just sort of plant that seed that is our policy. But otherwise, again, it sounds like you've been quite thoughtful in many of the things you've considered in response to comments and the like. And I would just ask you to continue to outreach and keep listening and, let's go from there and keep working to make this a better project.
Right.
Mr. Mayor, could I
Yes.
just ask a scheduled question? Are we going to discuss tonight whether we're going to calendar this, or is that a discussion for tomorrow's mayor meeting?
I guess I'd probably say that would be something I would expect we'd talk about scheduling at tomorrow's meeting. You're welcome to add your 2 cents now if you'd like to publicly state anything.
I may not be able to participate in that meeting. That's the only reason I ask. But if it's going to be talked about, I'll at least try to call in and listen. Thanks.
All right, you're free to make comments you wish to make now if you do. Any other comments? If not, again, thank you so much for coming back and your continued improvement with the project.
Thank you all very much for your
Thank you
time.
very much.
Thank you.
Take care.
All right, let's move on. Next item on the agenda is climate change mitigation energy plan. Mr. Shields?
Thank you, Mayor Charter, members of council. So we're joined tonight by Kate Walker and Cindy Mester, who have been working with the Environmental Sustainability Council on developing this climate change mitigation energy action plan. Kate Walker will give us the presentation tonight, and we look forward to a discussion with City Council on the content of the plan and the things that we'll need to have as we go forward if we're to implement the plan. None of this is easy. Much of it will depend on good federal and state partners, but there are also really important things we can do locally. And this plan is, I think, a really important roadmap for us to taking those steps. And we've been taking them over the past 15 years, but with an actual plan, we can, I think, accelerate that and also increase some of our investments in carbon emission reduction in particular. Ms. Walker, let me turn it over to you for our staff report and look forward to the discussion after that report.
Good evening, council members. I'm Kate Walker, the Environmental Sustainability Coordinator for the city. This plan is, I was pretty specific about the title of the plan because it's about climate change mitigation. That is, reducing our impact on climate change. It's an energy action plan. What can we do about energy use in the city to mitigate our effect on climate change? So It will have some other impacts. It's going to have impacts very broadly, but it will have some impacts on our resilience, but it's not specifically addressing all of the aspects of climate. What it's addressing is what we can do to reduce our impact on it. So if we go to the next slide, we have goals for energy use and climate. And specifically in terms of numbers, if we go to the next slide, you can see that the green lines are the goals that we established in 2017 following the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments resolution. City Council passed a resolution in 2017 establishing a 20% reduction over 2005 levels by 2020 and an 80% reduction by 2050. By 2050. I'm sorry, the label in the middle there is wrong. It should be 50% by 2030. That regional goal shown in the middle was adopted very recently, and the city supported its adoption, but we didn't adopt it for ourselves. And one of the questions might be, well, why not? If we look at the red line, our calculated emissions in the city have reduced since 2005 by 2%. So extrapolating that to 2020, you can see we're unlikely to have made our goal. But there's a good reason for that, a clear reason for that, which we can see on the next slide. What's impacting our emissions in the city of Falls Church? The big reduction that has been achieved was through our electricity fuel mix. So this is thanks to largely to Dominion Energy. They have made a lot of changes from coal-fired power plants to gas-fired power plants and increased their power plant efficiency, and that's resulted in a 16% decrease in emissions for the city on the energy that we use. But it's counterbalanced by our population growth and our growth in commercial floor areas. So the very things that make the city an activity center for the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, where we are part of the regional plan, is that the city should be a center of growth. And I think it's part of the plan that the city has for itself. We want to develop in our commercial areas so that we can support the continued small town feel in an urban environment. So this is the reason why we wouldn't want to try and aim directly for that interim goal that the region has set, because we're still an activity center. So 2 slides on now. Here's the big picture. Where are our greenhouse gas emissions coming from? Most of them, if you take a single chunk, are from transportation and mobile emissions. That's, like buildings like bulldozers and so on, but mostly it's transportation. And we need to be clear that transportation number is not only city residents and city businesses using vehicles, but it's also pass-through traffic. It's mostly pass-through traffic. And then counterbalancing that, we have high energy use in our buildings, both in commercial buildings and residential buildings. And those elements, transportation and energy use in buildings, make up 94% of our emissions. There are some others, but they're very small compared to those. So those are the areas in which we need to focus if we're interested in reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide. So the Energy Action Plan, in essence, can be very simple. In fact, I only wanted to have bullets 1 and 2 here. Number 1, reduce energy use. Number 2, where we can't reduce energy use, use renewable energy. But as Wyatt pointed out, we can't just do that. We need federal and state legislation to support what we want to do. a lot of the things in this plan we can't do without the federal government and the state government supporting it. And we're going to need to partner with people regionally, even partner locally. You know, there are some of these action items that could require partnering with local businesses. But it's a question of we can't do it alone. Next slide. In terms of reducing energy use and all of the action items that I've proposed, this is a first draft. It was prepared with input from the ESC and the Energy Transition Subcommittee. It's full of ideas. All of them are challenging. Some of them would need supporting legislation for us to implement them. Some, like changing the property tax structure, are breathtakingly difficult. Others are just really difficult, but they're all challenging. We have been trying hard to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and although we've made some progress, if we look at it per capita, and even on the city basis, you know, we have made a 2% reduction while we're still growing. The city is growing rapidly, but we've still managed to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by all the good things that we've been doing. We've still got a long, long way to go. So we can skim through the ideas, but what I want to do is leave more time for discussion, assuming that you've looked through these and will have some reactions to them. The point of this is not that I can tell you how much each one would cost to implement at this point. The analysis of that question takes a lot of work, and that's where we may need additional resources in order to do this. So just a quick skim through the action items that is described in the plan. Number one, transportation, the biggest single item. If you split the buildings into commercial and residential. So transportation use, I looked at 3 potential areas in which we can address our emissions. So to and from the city, and the way we reduce people using transportation to get to and from the city is by doing what you were talking about just a few minutes ago, mixed use and high density development. It's really important to make sure that we have transit to that. And I really appreciate the work that you have all done, but especially Dave's done in terms of maintaining our transit options for the city. And now that we're all beginning this work from home thing, communications infrastructure is something else we need to make sure we have. We need communications infrastructure for everybody, not just for those who can afford to pay for it themselves. And then sort of half as a joke, if we could put tolls on Route 7 and 29, we could really cut down on the pass-through traffic. But I've been saying that since I arrived in the city, and everyone says, yeah, nice idea. So it's just, I wanted to make it clear that some of this is a sort of brainstorming concept, and what I'd like you to do is to narrow down what's really worth pursuing. Within the city, working on street accessibility to pedestrians, bicycles, and other forms of transport. Transportation within the city, I know every transit option costs money, but we may need to invest in that if we really want to reduce emissions in the city. Little electric shuttle, driving around, people using scooters, electric bikes, all sorts of ways of traveling around the city. There has to be a solution somewhere to the parking. We know that there exists enough parking in the city for everyone to park their car if they need to. We've got to find a way to incentivize businesses to be willing to share. And then going on to energy efficiency, this takes federal action to get vehicle energy efficiency and emissions reductions. It takes state action to increase the electric vehicle market. We're not getting enough electric vehicles. We had arranged to have, Don Bayer had very kindly offered to provide an electric vehicle for the Falls Church Festival for us to show. but they sold the one they had left the day before. So I had a volunteer bring it in. We still got to talk about it, but there need to be more vehicles available within Virginia, and that takes state legislation and state action to advocate for it. And yes, electric vehicle adoption is important, but it should only be where internal combustion engines would otherwise be used. The electric vehicle is not the answer to the problem. The answer to the problem is to travel less by having high density, by having transit, by avoiding moving, by making moving around the city easier without a car. Electric vehicle adoption is part of the last resort, but it's something that we can encourage, and it really is happening in the city. If you look at the adoption curve for electric vehicles, it's literally exponential in the city. So we're doing well, but we've got more to do. Next slide, please. Moving on to buildings, the challenge that we have with reducing energy use in buildings is motivation. It doesn't cost enough to motivate most people to take the action they need to take to make their buildings, whether commercial or residential, more energy efficient. One of the things I've been very impressed by recently is looking at the Giant at the top of Route 7. They have gone to closed-door refrigeration systems. They have light dimming. They're making changes, and I think, I doubt if it's entirely a sustainability motivation that's driving them. I think we'll find if we could make contact with them that what they're interested in is reducing their costs. And so that's something that we need to make as a motivation, and nobody likes to see the words increase and tax in the same phrase. And it's not something we can do. You know, we can only affect electricity prices by persuading the state to change the way it does things. So the other things we need to do are incentivize or subsidize reduced energy use and communicate other motives. A more energy efficient building is more comfortable, it's more resilient, it's just a quieter, calmer, better place to be, and that's nice. Specifically in new construction, we're beginning to do this. We're incentivizing low energy use intensity in our mixed use developments. And I would like to see low energy use intensity be a primary criterion for the special exceptions process, not a secondary criterion. But we also need to really do some work on getting better building codes. Virginia is behind a lot of the rest of the country on adopting energy efficiency in their building codes, and we need to push for that to happen. You might be surprised to see tree canopy and green infrastructure here, but both have significant impacts on energy use. We're so lucky to have our 46% tree canopy. Trees offer us shade in the summer, and then in the winter they drop their leaves and let the light in to warm up the buildings. So our deciduous trees are a huge asset in terms of energy management. Green roofs, too, are they're not just about having a green atmosphere, but also they take heat out of the building. In the summer, they insulate it. In the winter, they are an energy management technique. PACE, we've talked for a long time about property assessed clean energy. So this is a system where loans for energy efficiency and actually stormwater too can be linked to property tax. So they can be, but they haven't proved cost competitive yet in Virginia. So at the moment, if you go for a PACE loan, it's more expensive than almost any other kind of loan you can get. The advantage is it's supposed to be short term, but it doesn't work yet. The good thing is that the state is developing a PACE ordinance. They have the ordinance, they're actually developing a PACE program. So it may be that we don't need to build one of our own, we can just sign on to theirs. And obviously, you know, new construction isn't everything that's happening. The buildings that already exist also need to be more energy efficient. So we need to find ways to incentivize and subsidize improvements. And again, money is a big motivator, so we may need to put money into doing this. A green bank is now an option for us, though I don't think for the city alone that would be an option, but maybe it's something we can push to do with our other local Virginia jurisdictions, either through MVRC or through COG, something we need to think about. There's that ugly higher taxes word again, but as I said, that's not something we can do alone. PACE can be used for residential as well as new construction, and also for existing commercial. I'd like to see a program to help homeowners understand the viability of heat exchangers as a home heating option. Gas is never a clean source of energy, and if we could get more people switching to electricity, that would be good. Next slide.
For you.
Okay, so the second thing to do where you can't reduce energy use is to get renewable energy. We have a number of options for that. If on the next slide, keep pushing for cleaner power from the utilities. We've got to make sure that Virginia Clean Energy Act gets fully implemented. Try and do local generation of solar on city property. PPAs may not work, but we may need to just put our own money straight into it, spend a little more if that's what it takes, and help others do the same. Buying renewables is sort of a last resort, but we can do it through a virtual PPA or large-scale renewable energy that was discussed in NVRC, but sort of didn't get anywhere. I think partly because Arlington came up with a new option. Community choice aggregation is an interesting concept where the city buys renewable energy and or sets up a utility that sells that renewable energy to all community members unless they opt out. RECs and carbon offsets are the things that we do when we can't do anything else, but they're not ideal. Next slide, Cindy. Again, we can skip this one, you've heard it. I found a nice action item format in the Rockville Climate and Energy Plan. One of the things that I think is worth noting is that theirs is the shortest I've seen so far. It's about 125 pages. DC's is 275. By the time this is, next slide, Cindy. By the time this is filled out, it's an enormous amount of work. And one of the things that's going to be really challenging is a lot of these actions are going to affect citywide staff. So it's going to require a lot of internal meetings to talk about how it could actually be done. And I'm going to need some help. Cindy, I think that's it.
That was a wonderful presentation, very thorough, lots of great ideas. Why don't we go ahead and open it up to questions and comments, Ms. Hiscott?
Thank you, Kate, and I want to thank the ESC and ETS for working on this as well. There's a tremendous amount of expertise in our community that you've done a great job harnessing their energy, to put a pun on the energy plan. I know we're going to have a lot of questions, so I'll just start with a few. This mitigation plan is incredibly important for all the reasons you discussed. You look at the graphs of where we had hoped to be and where we are, and then you amplify that across the country. It's obvious that we still have a lot of work to do, and that these issues are, as you mentioned, very complicated. And in addition to that, we're addressing energy, but we haven't really talked about the resilience plans. We've also been talking about stormwater a lot in the city, and I think energy, this is even just one subset of the overall resilience plan that we as a council and as a city need to be addressing. So I want to make sure that we include that in our discussions about how we prioritize moving forward, whether that's stormwater or continuity of operations in emergency situations, in addition to the energy efficiency. And I just want to throw out a couple of things that I know that I would like to know more about in order to help prioritize. And that is working towards some kind of, general understanding of what is legally possible to do in terms of incentivizing or taxing and understanding what current staff we have or what staffing we would need in order to do additional types of incentives. I mean, in terms of how you actually put it into place. And I think that'll help us prioritize what we want to address first and foremost. So the legal perspective, the staffing perspective, and then just keeping in mind that in addition to mitigation, we want to look at resiliency and a lot of the other areas that we've been talking about. But I'll let others ask some questions and continue to have this discussion moving forward. Thank
All
you.
right, thank you. Ms. Hardy?
Thank you.
Thank you, Kate, and the ESC and everyone who worked on this. I think as we've all said before, that, I mean, besides COVID, this climate is really the next big or already here existential crisis. So I'm glad that we're spending a little more time on this. Going back to kind of the three main contributors of our greenhouse gas emissions, I think I jotted down that transportation was the vast majority, 42%, commercial buildings 28%, residential buildings 24%. Kate, I think you mentioned for the transportation, the proportion that's city residents versus commuters. You said it's mostly commuters, people passing through the city. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So the interestingly, the numbers for the buildings are basically measured. They're data that's reported by the utilities. So the numbers are actual measurements of energy use. The transportation numbers are based on the regional model of transportation, and we get assigned a certain percentage of that based on our transportation administrative zones, I think.
Got it.
So
Directionally, do we know
it's
how
a
many
much
of
more
those are our
complex
15,000
calculation.
residents? Like, are we
I'm
able to
sorry?
break down that yellow bar graph and say, out of those, our 15,000 residents contributes this much of our total emissions?
No, there really isn't a way of doing that.
But our hunch is that it's mostly other people outside of the city as they pass through, given that we've got some major crossroads. Is that correct?
Yes.
Got it.
Yes.
So I guess moving on to the other two buckets, there are so many good ideas you've included, Kate, and I think I've said this before about other kind of climate action plans. The former consultant me feels the need to do some quick and dirty prioritization. So I saw that sample slide you had at the end that talked about kind of more detailed prioritization, but I feel like some sort of 2x2 matrix on impact versus effort would be really helpful. So for all those different ideas, what actually is the lowest effort and obviously the highest impact are ones that we should do immediately? What things are already underway? What's in our control versus what's out of our control? The things that are out of control should be advocacy efforts. But there's so many good things in there that I guess I would like to see some sort of staff effort to help filter them for us. I'm personally obviously interested in the ones that have the most impact and the lowest amount of effort. In particular, if we believe that city buildings, so going back to the three bar chart slide again, that if our city buildings contribute some amount in those commercial buildings, and it's something that we have direct control over, do we need to invest in retrofitting any of our existing buildings? Is it adding PV panels to the community center and city hall if possible? Are those things that we can directly control and actually would create more impact than other ideas out there?
I think what we can do in terms of city buildings, so John Ward, who's chair of the Energy Transition Subcommittee, did your quick and dirty, met your criteria there, did a quick and dirty analysis of emissions by city operations, and it's about 2% of the community's emissions, even if you include the schools. So in terms of the impact on our emissions, it would be small. In terms of the impact of leading by example, I think it could be really big. But the actual impact on emissions is very small.
Okay. In general, I'm very supportive of kind of taking more effort. I guess there's just so many things I think that we could do. I think I'm looking to staff to help us do that filtering of what would create the most impact based on the resources that we do have. And if we find that that impact is not enough to even move us closer to those 2050 numbers, that's when I think you'd come to council and ask us for those resources. But thank you very much for putting this together and making this part of our agenda.
All right, thank you. Other questions or comments? Vice Mayor Connolly.
Thank you very much, Ms. Walker. I always learn a lot whenever you talk. There's so many different things that we can do. And as Ms. Hardy just said, it'd be nice to have that matrix to know the least work and the highest impact. Just a couple questions on, I guess the emission sources that's a good chart to be on. So the schools just found out that they got grants to get electric school buses. So how much does using an electric school bus versus a diesel or a gas-powered school bus reduce the transportation emissions? Is there a way to measure that?
We can calculate how much lower the emissions are, but showing it as a percentage of this big yellow bar wouldn't be realistic. The big yellow bar is based on a model, and it's based on all traffic movement and our airline travel, for example, regionally and then taken down to the city level. So what we can do is we can say each change will make this much impact on emissions, but that won't necessarily be reflected in the COG inventory.
That's too bad. Because we've also talked about our police, our police fleet.
Yes, of course.
Our
It's
city
wonderful.
fleet.
And I think, it's really, changing the police vehicles will have a big impact on the city's emissions, but it will have a tiny impact on the overall picture.
Right.
I think, though, that it really is
Because we are
important.
tiny, because we are the little city. We're just tiny. And then what about like the George Mason or Meridian High School being a net zero ready school? And is that the same kind of impact that transportation would have?
Well, it's actually going to be more visible. So within that commercial energy block is included the city's energy consumption. So it might actually shift the bar a tiny bit.
Okay.
Because that's more measurable. That's more, the numbers are more real.
Got it. So the blue and green numbers are more real. The yellow is more theoretical or regional or modelly.
Yes.
Yes, okay. And then as far as leading by example, I think it would be great if, once the net zero-ness of the high school does come online, if we're able to use that as a way to encourage other commercial builders to do that. I think, there's the Dan Z sustainability dashboard that's in the high school, and it's got all sorts of measurements coming regularly of airflow and energy use, and we'll eventually have photovoltaic measurements. So I think that would be a good way, and I don't know if that was in one of your ideas of things we can do, but of sharing the successes that we have far and wide as an educational piece.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Other comments or questions? Mr. Snyder?
Yeah, so thank you, Kate, and thanks to the ESC for the work on this. This is a pretty graphic illustration of how far we have to go as a city and as a country. And the component parts, some of them are going to be a pretty tough thing to do, either financially or in terms of persuasion or policy. So I think we need a lot more discussion and consideration of what's here, as well as maybe some things that might be available from other sources. We belong to that, what is it, ICLEI, International Climate something or other cities program, and maybe we could learn some more from what has worked elsewhere. So I kind of view this as a beginning, using our existing resources to lay out a kind of a data foundation, and then some ideas that I think we need work on what's here as well as what's not here. And And then there are a couple things that are obviously very clear. One of the things is that regionally, and we've been working on that in many ways, but regionally, we need to reduce the traffic that comes into the city, and certainly bus rapid transit is something that hopefully might be useful on Route 7 and 29, two of the major intersections, which are state highways. So I think that without a change in the law, the tolling idea doesn't go anywhere, because those are VDOT controlled highways.
I knew that.
Yeah. But, and that's just an example of, this is the beginning of work, not the end, and a lot more dialogue will be really useful, as well as kind of asking for additional ideas, as well as thoughts about the ones that are here. And I keep thinking about ways to persuade energy shifts in both the commercial and personal areas, and what we can do to incentivize that, rather than putting more taxes on people. So that'll be something that'll be interesting. I'm also interested in, we're requiring LEED Gold. Well, how does LEED Gold compare with net zero? And should we be more forward-looking in what we're requiring of new developments? After all, they're adding a lot of the people that account for a lot of the additional transportation movements in the city. So what is it that's reasonable to ask? Also, in terms of supporting electric vehicles, we're all doing it, but the question is, what is the metric that we ought to be using? How many charging stations per 1,000 people, or how many charging stations per 200 cars? And I guess there's some consultants that can help us with that, but I'd like more clarity about what we really need to go for in that, and what are the sources of funding for that. And clearly part of the infrastructure legislation in Washington, if it's passed, will help with that. At VML, I think I saw that Virginia, at least the presenter from Dominion, estimates that by 2030, Virginia might have 500,000 electric vehicles on the road, but we've got 8 million vehicles. So that doesn't bode well for making a 50% reduction in greenhouse gases that President Biden has set as a goal. So clearly there needs to be ratcheting up at the national level and state level as well, to provide the infrastructure and the vehicles. Metro, I've asked Metro about this, and why don't they move toward electric buses? What I get back from Metro is it would cost at least $2 billion in investments to provide the infrastructure for that. I'm not satisfied with that answer. Metro runs buses through the city, and I think we need to keep pushing them for a better answer than, oh no, we can't do it. So those are just a couple of the things. And finally, in terms of transportation, in addition to bus rapid transit and doing our best to reduce single occupancy vehicles operating through the city, we had a local shuttle bus at one point that was eliminated as sort of a symbolic gesture after the financial crisis over my objection. I think we need to look at how we can provide accessible electric transportation for our people, so they don't have to take a car and drive it from one part of the city to another. And that's an unmet challenge, and one that I'd like to see us work on. And with new technology, there ought to be more options available that are convenient for people on an individual basis, so that they don't have to drive their cars around to get from one point of the city to another. So these are all some initial reactions. I'm hoping that no one assumes that that everything on here is being endorsed, or that there aren't other things that ought to be on here that will work to do that. But I think this is that getting a discussion going about how to meet our goals in a more in a more direct and more detailed way is something important to do. And I view this report as sort of kind of the beginning of that process, if you will, to sort of evolve a plan. But I certainly don't want anybody to pick out something from this plan and say, oh, that's ridiculous, so we shouldn't do the whole plan. Or you can't do that, so that undercuts the credibility of the whole plan. That's not really what we're doing here. What we're doing is putting out some specific ideas for further work and discussion, technical, legal, practicality, public acceptance. But if we're going to make a positive impact, we're going to have to get into the specifics. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Are there any other further comments? If not, I just want to, again, thank you, Kate, and our citizens who have been so active, and I wish Dan were here to see some of the great developments and improvements we've made over just even the past year with the opening of the new high school and LEED Gold for our new buildings that are going up in the city. And we're just making excellent progress. And so this is quite impressive. Lots more to do, we know that, but I think you've laid out a framework that we can have further discussion with to really help ourselves get there. So thank you, and thank the ESC and the rest of our engaged community for getting us this far. Would you all like to take a short break before we move on to the next item, or just keep on going?
Keep going.
All right, leaving. All right, I'll tell you what, since everyone's leaving, I'm going to go ahead and call a 5-minute recess. We'll reconvene at 9:21.
She had a good idea.
All right, it's 9:21. As promised, we are back in session with our last major item, at least, plastic bag tax. Mr. Shields, are you going to introduce this item?
I will, and Zach Bradley will give the staff report on this. Lonnie Marchetti, who is our solid waste coordinator, and Kate Walker together put this staff report together, so we want to thank them for that. Lonnie was slated to give tonight's staff report, but she is under the weather tonight, so Zach will step in for her. I will just note that what we're asking tonight is for council to give direction to staff on this policy item of whether to proceed with development of an ordinance to authorize a 5-cent tax on plastic grocery bags, and if so, we have a schedule at the end where that would be possible to bring that to council. Let me turn it over to Mr. Bradley for the details, and then we look forward to council questions, discussion, and direction.
All right, thank you, Mr. Shields. Good evening, everybody. So tonight I'm before you, as Mr. Shields stated, present you kind of a synopsis of where we are at and what we have done regarding a plastic bag tax that would be applicable to the City of Falls Church. So as a background, as of last year, the state did pass legislation allowing us to implement a bag tax on certain businesses throughout the city. As we all know, single-use bags do present quite the environmental challenge, as many of them somehow find their way out of landfills, garbage bins, so on and so forth. And I'm sure we've all seen them kind of floating around in the street. And especially us being in the Chesapeake Bay area, that very sensitive to that. A plastic bag tax would be in compliance with the Environment for Everyone chapter of the city's comprehensive plan, as well as the city's solid waste management plan. Both of those programs have been pretty well established. And the ESC has been recommending some sort of bag tax, litter prevention, otherwise discouraging single-use plastic bags in various forms since 1989. And this program would be overseen and carried out by the Virginia Tax Commissioner. The state is taking on the responsibility of ensuring that all the taxes will be paid and distributed to the localities on a 5-cent per bag rate. The retailers can withhold 2 cents per bag until January 1st of 2023, and then thereafter it is 1 cent per bag. Staff and other regional jurisdictions have been working with the Northern Virginia Regional Commission with the intent of creating kind of a standard, a standard language ordinance, if you will, so that everybody in the Northern Virginia area has a very similar, if not identical, ordinance to enforce. And as of September 1st of this year, the Virginia tax guidance was finalized and several of our questions were asked. Based off that, everybody has proceeded, though all surrounding jurisdictions have proceeded a bit faster than we have by passing some form of ordinance. Excuse me, and that includes Fairfax County, Arlington County, and the city of Alexandria. Again, virtually identical, very minor nuances in terms of how they're structured. And all three jurisdictions and a proposed bag tax for the city of Falls Church would assess the tax on all grocery stores, convenience stores, and drugstores. And they all would contain the same exemptions for non-taxable bags. These are multi-use bags, plastic bags that are intended for multi-use, generally defined as greater than 4 mils thick, so on and so forth. We do not intend to deviate from the neighboring jurisdictions other than to fit the language into our city code with references, so on and so forth. So if we are to proceed, we do have some next steps. We do have to prepare a staff report and an ordinance, send it to council and other boards and commissions as needed to get the language circulated and approved. We would have a pretty hefty lift for a business outreach program. There are 20 identified businesses within the city. At least 13 of them needs multi-language translation services. Given the high ratio of that, we would provide English, Spanish, and Vietnamese materials to all 20 businesses. We are not going to try and separate out, given that there's not much of a difference between 13 and 20. We'll also have some window clings and some decals that could be placed at customer service checkouts. And then some mailers and door tags for any curbside customers so that they are aware of the tax. The basic intent of the outreach program is to let customers know that this is not something that these stores are collecting, but it is something that the state is collecting to discourage single-use plastic bag taxes. That's been a common misconception in other areas. So we want to make sure that's well communicated to everybody. Part of the outreach, there is a fiscal impact. It is expected to be less than $5,000, and that would cover translation services and any special materials, flyers, mailers, so on and so forth, so that those businesses can post those materials. Sorry. So as I said, virtually identical through all the surrounding jurisdictions. Alexandria is the only one that provided any kind of estimate, and they estimated that of their 115 eligible retailers, they would net about $50,000 per year in the plastic bag tax. I do want to highlight the fact that this tax is an encouragement to discontinue the use of single-use plastic bag single-use plastic bags, and the taxes would be expected to decline over time with the ideal goal of not being able to collect anything. So again, if we are to move forward, one of the first milestones we would hit would be to bring a first reading to council on November 8th, with a second reading in mid-December, so that we can submit the ordinance to the Virginia Tax Commissioner. There is a 3-month waiting period once we submit that prior to enacting and starting to collect the tax. And during that time, we would do our communication outreach campaign. And if everything goes well, we would be able to implement the tax on April 1st. So with that, I will end the staff report and open it up for any questions.
Questions or comments from people here on council? Ms. Hardy?
Thanks, Mr. Bradley. I think for me, the question is not if, but when, and so it sounds like April 1st is the soonest we can implement this. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what are the other jurisdictions doing?
In terms of implementation,
Yes. Are they January 1st?
so most of them have passed something within the last month to a couple of weeks. So they're probably ahead of us by a couple of months. So I'd say the soonest they could probably enact something would be February, thereabouts. So that, like I said, they are a couple months ahead. And they have mostly passed their ordinances in September into early October.
Got it. Let's find out kind of what those dates are, because I think there's something to be said with aligning not only the content of the ordinance, because we want to make sure that it makes sense for everybody in Northern Virginia, but also the date, because I'm sure that in those jurisdictions, they're going to be doing outreach and communication with businesses and letting the community know. And there's certainly value in us, being on the same schedule for that reason. So not only having the same ordinance, but also the same schedule if possible. And along the same lines, I really like the idea of kind of a regional communication campaign. Again, similar communication materials. If you see the same logo and branding everywhere, people just will get it, right? We're small in a big region. I think it makes sense. This is probably also a place where we can enlist the chamber potentially to help do some outreach, given that the Eden Center is a member of the chamber, and that's where we may have some Vietnamese translation issues. I bet they could be useful for us there. Finally, my last idea is, rather than, I think in some jurisdictions I've seen that they offer creating new reusable bags. I, for one, I'm not sure others are in the same boat or not. I have so many reusable bags that I'm trying to get rid of them. I bet if the community had some sort of drive to collect reusable bags, we can just offer them out. And that's, again, a good way to not consume more, but try to reuse where possible.
Are you disposing of your reusable bags, Letty?
I just have so many. People give them out all the time. And I bet a lot of people are in the same situation, that if we all donate some, people could use them instead of having to buy new ones. I think that's another good way to reinforce the message. So thank you. I'm very supportive. Let's move forward.
Mr. Snyder?
Thank you very much. So my question's a little bit different from Councilmember Hardy. My question is not whether, but how. So I do have a couple how questions. The first is, have we reached out to our entire business community to determine the practicality and their ability to comply? And that means our entire business community, including the Eden Center. The second thing is, what happens to so I assume that 5 cents will be collected, 2 cents can be maintained by the retailer. What happens to the additional 3 cents? Where does that go?
So ultimately, that would be remitted to the City of Falls Church, so it's collected by the state.
Right.
And then remitted to the city.
So I would like to see a designation of that money being to environmental programs. And the reason why I say that is that I want to avoid the impression of, oh, there they go again, looking for something new to tax. And it's unfortunate that the term tax is used in this context, because it's really, it's something different from the typical tax. But that's what it is, and so I don't hide from that. But I do think if the purpose of this is environmental, the purpose of this is not to build the general fund. The purpose of this is to address an environmental issue. The whole justification for this is as an environmental issue, not as a money-raising issue. So I would hope that part of our ordinance, when we get it, will be a designation of the results of whatever net we collect, which will probably hopefully go down over time. That's, after all, the whole objective. But whatever net we collect would be used for environmental purposes. Another point I want to make is that when this was first discussed, maybe a decade ago or less, the Environmental Services Council at that time made a trip to some recycling centers and found that these sorts of bags really gum up the works and create a real problem in terms of recycling. I don't see that listed here, so I want a little better justification, if you will, for why we're doing this. So outreach to the business community. Oh, and the farmers market. Are the farmers market vendors capable of providing an option if people forget to bring their reusable bags? Can they provide the paper bag option? Because try as hard as folks might, a lot of people just don't think to do that, and they probably will be thinking to do it more to bring the reusable bags, but does everyone have the option of the paper bags that don't have the environmental negative elements that plastic bags have? So those are all questions for me. Again, my view is, yes, we should move forward, but I have a lot of questions about exactly how to do it so that I get maximum public and business buy-in before we mandate something. And finally, important to me, if we're doing this on the basis of environment and not revenue raising, which I really believe is the intention of this, or the stated intention of it, then we ought to designate any monies that come from it to environmental programs. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Hiscott?
Thanks. I just wanted to state that I'm unequivocally in support of moving forward with this plastic bag, and I agree that any revenues we raise, we can put towards environmental, but the hope is that we don't raise a lot of funds from it because we're incenting the right behavior of reducing it in the first place. So I just wanted to add my support.
All right, thank you, Vice Mayor Connolly.
Thank you, Zach. You mentioned that there are about 20 businesses in Falls Church that this would apply to. It would not apply to restaurants? If a restaurant is putting some takeout food in a bag, that doesn't count, right?
That is correct. That would not apply to restaurants. It's just those three businesses, grocery stores, convenience stores, and I'm drawing a blank on the third one.
Drugstores.
Drugstores, thank you. So even to Councilmember Snyder's point, the farmer's market would be exempt as well, and those vendors would not be expected to have to pay that bag tax.
Okay. And it only applies to plastic bags, not paper bags, right?
That is correct, yes.
All right. So I am fully in support of this too, and I think the sooner we can do it, the better. Thank you.
All right, any other comments? I also support proceeding without any delay. All right, thank you very much, Mr. Bradley. Let's move on to other items, which would be council schedule and council comments. Mr. Snyder?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have a request that we issue a proclamation at our next regular meeting in honor of Tom Tate, who is one of our long-term citizens. He and his wife were both active in the space program at NASA. He has created the first endowed scholarship for St. James School, and he was instrumental as the chief staff person in Congress for NASA programs, including the Apollo program, and worked very closely with Jack Swigert, who was one of the three crew members on Apollo 13. So hopefully, if council is okay, we could issue a proclamation recognizing his service to the family church community and the nation at our next regular meeting. And he'll be particularly honored by his alma mater this Thursday. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks for bringing that to our attention. Ms. Hardy?
I had a request to get something added to our schedule while we're all here. So earlier tonight, we had a really good discussion with the Housing Commission led a community discussion at the Fields, given some of the complaints we had heard about their living conditions. And so perhaps in about 2 weeks or so would be a good time to invite Kettler Management Company, who's responsible for the Fields, to discuss with council the progress they've made at the building in response to those tenant concerns. So Mr. Shields, please pass on our thanks to the housing staff for also working with the commission, and then extend that invite, please, to Kettler.
Mr. Snyder, do you have additional
Yeah,
comment?
Mr. Mayor, I just want to support what Councilmember Hardy just said. There were a number of council members there. We couldn't say anything and didn't, but it was a very impressive job by the Housing Commission, and it's something that I think we need to pay attention to make sure that the laws are enforced and that that people are treated well. Thanks.
All right, Mr. Duncan?
The meeting tonight was reminiscent for me of a similar meeting, I can't even remember how many years ago, 5 or 6 maybe, at St. James with the Broad Falls community. We had, the landlord rep from Broad Falls there, and a number of tenants came and were unhappy with some of the same things we heard about tonight, vermin and rats and bugs and poor maintenance and so forth. And it just occurred to me as I'm listening to the folks tonight, and I support, obviously, bringing Kettler in and hearing from them, but whatever happened to Broad Falls? I've not heard anything further. I'd like to hope and think that the problems were all addressed and solved and everything's going okay there, but it did make me worry since, the stuff at the fields is going on just a stone's throw from where the city manager and I live. I don't have a lot of eyes into the communities there, and I would love to see us circle back to Broad Falls and see if we can get the housing staff to make contact with whoever there might be representing the tenants and just find out how things are at Broad Falls, so that if there are problems, we could maybe bundle that up with the fields and get 2 good things done in the same vein this fall.
I'd be happy to follow up with a report to council on any issues that we're managing at that property as well.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions or requests? Sure.
I just wanted to thank the Vice Mayor for convening the Government Ops Committee meeting today at noon, where we had a full and very interesting discussion led by the manager and the Human Resources Director and the Assistant City Manager about personnel issues, shortages. Ms. Hardy was in attendance. There's a lot of good information. I think the manager's coming to us with some information in another couple of weeks, and I look forward to that and commend the topic of compensation and acquisition of talent and retention and so forth to everyone's attention on the city side. It's a very, very important that we focus on that, I think, and try to head into the new year with a good head of steam in terms of hiring and compensation for our city employees.
All right, thank you. Other comments or questions or requests? If not, I will thank you all this evening. Thanks for the folks who came and spoke. And we will adjourn, and we'll have our meeting tomorrow morning, the mayor's meeting. So good evening, everyone. We're adjourned.
Thank you, council.